Hi everyone, welcome to the September 28th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragonen. I'll be joined in just a moment by my usual co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're looking back at last weekend's stakes racing from around the country, focusing on some Breeders' Cup preps that took place at Parks, Belmont, some stakes at Churchill that probably didn't serve as Breeders' Cup preps, but a couple of noteworthy speed figures from there. And we'll also talk about some other races from around the country, including some stakes from Monmouth, Gulfstream, and even Remington Park in Craig's home state to close things out. But Craig, the bulk of the top stakes action did take place at Parks this past week, and we saw a really special performance from a couple of 3-year-olds in both the Pennsylvania Derby and the Gallant Bob. Hot Rod Charlie, who has kind of lived in the shadow of Essential Quality throughout the 3-year-old season, I think he's starting to assert himself as a major contender for the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yeah, he sure is. I mean, he ran a 1:33 TimeformUS speed figure on this day. He went right to the front, took the lead. I saw some people complaining about some like Midnight Bourbon not going to the lead, but the truth is Hot Rod Charlie was motoring. He ran some really fast early pace figures. It was 1:56 to the half mile. So if you're going to try to beat him to the lead in that kind of time, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, those are Nick's Go-like fractions, really fast horses. So he was able to hold on. Obviously, he slowed down. He's not a gun runner type at this point who could just keep on going. His final time was a 1:29, but that's still darn good. This was the best performance we've seen yet by a 3-year-old going 2 turns, in my opinion.
Yeah, I thought this was a huge effort. I think it backs up that stellar performance that he put forth in defeat in the Belmont Stakes when he arguably ran the best race, engaged in another quick pace there before he was gunned down by Essential Quality at the end. But Hot Rod Charlie, even though this was his first official Grade 1 victory, he's been turning in Grade 1 performances for a while now. And I know that this is just the 3rd victory of his career, and Essential Quality has this resume of always getting the job done. But from a speed figure standpoint, he and Essential Quality are pretty much neck and neck at this point going into the Breeders' Cup Classic, and we'll see which one can handle that step up against the older horses. But I think that they're both coming in with a big shot, and Hot Rod Charlie, he does have that versatility where he can either go to the lead and, like you said, get engaged in a pretty quick pace and keep going, or he can also come from just off the pace. Some might say that he's a little bit better when he's on the lead, but he's put forth big performances with any running style.
Yeah, he has, and I think Flavien Prat rode him perfectly because the main competition was Midnight Bourbon, and he just took it right to him, and that probably won him the race. I just love looking through Hot Rod Charlie's PPs and seeing his figures. They just keep ascending every single time. The one very minor dip was between the Belmont when he went from a 126 to a 124 in the Haskell, but that's the only time he's had any drop at all in his entire career, and he's run many times at this point, at least by modern standards, and he jumped up to that 133 last time. So, I mean, you could argue he may not have even reached his peak yet. He's just a really fast horse, and a really nice story with how cheaply he was bought early in his career. So that's the kind I can always get behind and root for.
Yeah, and being a son of Oxbow, I feel like he's not one that's likely to be rushed off to stud. I mean, crossing our fingers that maybe we'll get to see him next year. I haven't seen any reporting on that yet. But he's, as you said, he's just a horse that seems to keep getting better. So you want to see horses like that are hitting their peak at the end of their 3-year-old season come back as 4-year-olds and potentially be even better. You mentioned Gunrunner and Hot Rod Charlie not being able to run that kind of speed figure yet, but he's on track to get there next year if he continues to develop at this rate. Craig, I do think we have to briefly mention the incident at the top of the stretch that got a lot of people talking with Hot Rod Charlie veering out into the path of Midnight Bourbon. He definitely did carry that rival out about 3 or 4 paths coming around the far turn. I wouldn't say that it was nearly as bad as what Maximum Security did in the Kentucky Derby a few years ago, but a similar incident, or I should say an incident like that at a similar point in the race, to me, it more reminded me of that Preakness back from the 80s with Codex and Genuine Risk, and people at the time feeling that Genuine Risk was cost a shot at the Triple Crown, even though Codex went on to beat her by 3 or 4 lengths. And it was that kind of situation for me, where Hot Rod Charlie, I thought, was clearly best, and that incident was not altering the outcome of the race, but you still don't want to see that stuff.
No, it was a foul. There's no doubt about it. But In my opinion, it wasn't as bad as it looked on the pan either when they showed the head on and the view from behind. Yeah, there it was a little bit, but certainly not worthy of a disqualification given the margin of victory. I think that would have been really unfair to Hot Rod Charlie. But Flavian Pratt, he needs to be a little more careful with this horse because there really was no reason to do that. I think he was going to win the race anyway. Maybe he was just trying to, show him he had a little bit of competition, but the horse got away from him a little bit.
Yeah, I thought it was more of the latter because I didn't see Flavian Pratt trying to drift out. I know that these riders can do things with a great deal of finesse, and you can't always tell what they're intending to do. But Hot Rod Charlie just looked a little green. He was swapping leads many times from about the quarter pole home. He even swapped over to his right lead on the turn, which probably caused him to drift a little bit more in a more exaggerated fashion than he otherwise would have. When Flavian Pratt tugged on the left lane to get him back over to the inside, he switched leads again, and he was flipping his ears back and forth. He just looked like a horse that was more inexperienced than one who was making, I think, the 11th start of his career. So hopefully they can get that sorted out. I know that he's a horse that has worn blinkers in the past. I doubt they'll make an equipment change at this point, so close to the Breeders' Cup. But he definitely was a little green through the stretch, and still running such an impressive speed figure. You would imagine there's more improvement there. We'll see if it comes next time in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, and I do want to mention a couple of the others ran some really nice races. I mean, Midnight Bourbon backed up his run in the Travers, where even though he had everything his own way, he still ran a 126 final time figure that day, which is, we've talked about, that would have won a lot of Grade 1 races for older horses this year. And, he backed it up. He got a 130 here running that same 126 final time number. So a good effort from him. And how about the New York bred American Revolution? We had talked about him on our on the forecast. He had run a 118 winning at stakes last time, and he backed it up with a big 124 here. I do want to mention the speed figure a little bit because I'm sure some people were looking at that 133 going, that seems high, but it was really a pretty easy speed figure day. Everything kind of fell in the line other than the cotillion, but that was largely due to pace. We'll talk about that a little more, and that race wasn't included in the variant. That's something as a speed figure guy, if you include that when you're making the track variant, you can tend to inflate the other races a bit. So I didn't want to do that and left it out of the calculation. So I think that 133 is totally legit, and the 130 for Midnight Bourbon. And I mean, these are 3-year-olds, and it's a really good group right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out some of the also-rans, American Revolution in particular. I think he's an exciting horse, but let's do what you said and transition over to the Cotillion, where the pace really did have a major impact on the final time. They just did not go quickly up front, and even more so, I think the final time was held down by the fact that the horse that was setting the pace, Always Carina, just came up empty. So even though it was a slow pace, it still came apart a little bit, and that allowed Clairiere to get the job done. Clairiere probably just better than these horses anyway, but she didn't run the kind of final time that you might have expected given how fast some of the surrounding races went.
Yeah, this is one of those races where we use the pace notation that has a P next to the race rating. You can see looking under Clairiere in the chart, her final time figure is only a 107, and that's using the variant from all the other two-turn races. But then for that overall TimeformUS speed figure, we upgraded it between 7 or 8 points. It depends on the horse. I think it was 7 points or so. So she got a 115, which is about what she always runs, and it pretty much lined up for all the horses that way. Obligatory got a 110, Army Wife a 110. So I'm pretty happy the figure we gave is a good representation of these horses, and it's just one that has all blue fractions and really tough to make the figure based on the time of the race.
Yeah, I think Clairiere established her dominance over the horses that she was facing here. I still think it's going to be a tough task for her to make a major impact in the Breeders' Cup Distaff this year, facing a horse like Latruska and even some of the other older horses out there, like perhaps She Dares the Devil, who at times has run speed figures in the low 120s. So Clairiere just hasn't really run fast enough to be considered a top contender in that race yet, and also she has yet to defeat Malathot, who has had her number through their meetings earlier in the year, and obviously she's considered one of the top contenders for the Breeders' Cup Distaff among the 3-year-old fillies, ahead of Clairiere. So we'll see. She's obviously a horse that is bred to keep getting better with time, and she's improved her speed figure over her past few starts, but she'd have to take another step forward to win the Breeders' Cup Distaff or really even hit the board in that race.
Yeah, and a lot of people made a thing about how fast she came home, and really, in my opinion, she didn't come home all that fast. It would be equivalent quarter mile of 24:35. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good, but given the pace, it's probably exactly what she should have done. So, yeah, I'm not very high on her. I think it was just a race where the horses in front of her weren't very good. The slow pace kept her in the race. I know we've talked about this before, but I hate when the speed horses go this slow early. The pace figures barely cracked the 80 mark, which is obviously way too slow for these. And so yeah, it just threw the figures into turmoil. But as far as the race goes, I think it actually made it easier on Clairiere.
A horse that we can be pretty high on coming out of this weekend at Parks is Jackie's Warrior, who admittedly wasn't facing any serious competition in the Gallant Bob, but he showed up anyway and put forth another really fast speed figure, and he is establishing himself not just as the favorite for the Breeders' Cup Sprint, but the clear leader in the Eclipse Award race for the Sprint champion, even though he's just a 3-year-old and hasn't faced older horses yet. I mean, he's just laying down top performance after top performance, and none of the older horses in the Sprint division have come close to the kind of speed figures that Jackie's Warrior is laying down.
No, with Life is Good, who we're going to talk about later, pointing to the dirt mile, it's hard to envision any horses out there that can hang with Jackie's Warrior. He just goes fast, makes you come catch him. In this particular race, he didn't even have to go very fast. His opening quarter mile was only a 1:17, and I actually like that because it shows you he can rate when he needs to. He's not a runoff. We saw it in the Life is Good race where he was able to sit off of him a bit and still get the job done. So here he ran a 1:28 final time figure, final time and TimeformUS speed figure. Did it with consummate ease and, just a paid workout. Really good performance. And I don't know if he's going to run again. I would assume not before the Breeders' Cup. So he's almost guaranteed to be the favorite.
Yeah, and I mean, he still has to pass that test against the older horses in the Breeders' Cup, and at that point, I think we'll be able to just heap all the praise on him. But I mean, I think he's getting to that point where he's in that rarefied air of a horse like Mitoli, who looked so dominant in his year when he contested and won the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And obviously, like I said, Jackie's Warrior has to clear that hurdle, but it looks like he's set up perfectly to do it. And I agree with everything you said about that added versatility that he's gained this year, where he doesn't need to be on the lead, and he can sit alongside another horse and be perfectly relaxed and kick on when Joao Rosario needs him to. And, I don't want to say that he could have run a lot faster in this race because I think people make too much of horses getting geared down at the end, but he was never asked for his best at any point in this race. It's not like Joao rode him an upper stretch and then geared him down. He was just on cruise control through this entire race. So there's a big performance coming from Jackie's Warrior. We saw one in the Allen Jerkins last time, and I think he's got another one coming in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I just hope all these horses stay healthy and we get to see the best of Jackie's Warrior, because we could be in for a treat when the Breeders' Cup rolls around. The other race from Parks that we should talk about, just because it's a major prep for the Dirt Mile, is the Parks Dirt Mile, which featured a really fun battle between Mind Control and Silver State to the wire. And Craig, you rarely see a horse go rolling by to the front end of the 16th pole like Silver State did and get beat by the horse that he just passed.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's happened to me betting, I know. So normally it's a race where I would have bet a horse like Silver State and been cheering. But no, it wasn't the case here. I actually didn't even get to this card till the pick 5 started. So I had to go back and watch this race because, of course, I saw all the complaints about Ricardo Santana's ride. But frankly, I don't think he did anything wrong. I think the horse just got to goofing around and he was tough to keep straight and he was trying to correct them. But I'll leave that to you on that end. You're more of an expert there. But Mind Control just showed his gameness. I was a little surprised, particularly going 2 turns. And so maybe he has a new goal in mind. But that said, this was not a fast race. The TimeformUS speed figure was only a 1:16 for Mind Control. And if we're talking about a race where Life is Good is going to show up, that's not going to be near good enough.
Yeah, all this discourse about Ricardo Santana blowing the race, I think, is just total nonsense. If you watch the stretch driver, especially the head on, you can see he's got the whip in his left hand and is showing it to the horse, whipping him right up until the very end of the race. What happened, I think, to my eye, is that Silver State made the front end, and you can see just as he gets past mind control, his ears prick forward, which is a sign usually that a horse thinks his job is done. You typically see horses do that, or especially closers do that, when they hit the finish line. But unfortunately, Silver State thought his job was done about 20 strides before the finish line, and mind control was able to come back on him. And also remember, let's not just think that these riders are driving cars and that they can press the accelerator whenever they want. The individual characteristics of the horses also do matter, and Silver State is a horse that has kept his winning decisions pretty close throughout his career. He never is one that wins by much, and he came out on the wrong decision of one here. And also, Mind Control is just a really game horse who is a fighter. He never stops trying in his races, and most horses, they would not come back on another one like that, but Silver State, in addition to him pulling himself up a little bit, Mind Control was right there to come back at him. So credit to Mind Control for showing that typical grit and gameness to come back on that horse and win. But like you were alluding to, Craig, not the fastest race. And if Life is Good shows up with his top effort in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, it feels like the others are going to be battling for a minor award.
Yeah, and just a quick note on this one. I did look it up. Mind Control actually hadn't been two turns since his one and only time as a 2-year-old in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where he didn't fare very well. So maybe he has some more options now because he ran fine, but I don't really think that he's a grade one type horse at that distance.
Let's transition right to Belmont Park to discuss that other major prep for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile that was run this week, which was won by heavy favorite and likely heavy favorite for the Dirt Mile, Life is Good, the 3-year-old. Craig, not the fastest speed figure in the world, certainly a major drop-off from the number that he got when he was second to Jackie's Warrior in the Allen Jerkins. Do you care about that so much, or do you just view this as basically a public workout to get him to the next race?
Yeah, when I put the speed figures out from Saturday for both Belmont and Parks, one of the notes I made under was, this speed figure meant nothing to me whatsoever. It was a race where I tweeted early in the week that there's walkovers and then there's this race because, I mean, there was absolutely nobody who could even warm him up in here. I don't think any of these horses would have been a good work partner for him. He only did a 105 early pace figure for the quarter mile and half mile and was just cruising along. And this was a workout. That's really all it was. So I'm putting absolutely nothing into that 115 speed figure that he got for the win. This is a case where the pace was obviously slow for grade 2 older males, but the horses in behind them just weren't good enough that I wouldn't be comfortable using that pace upgrade at any level because they all basically ran their race in behind them. So I don't want to artificially inflate the other 2 horses in the race that actually finished. Unfortunately, chance it that something went wrong with him. But yeah, it's just one of those where the speed figure means nothing to me. If he runs back next in the Breeders' Cup, I'm going to be assuming he's closer to that 130 type horse we saw in the prior races.
Yeah, obviously we don't know how the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile field is going to come up just yet, but it's very unlikely that he'll be able to get away with a 105 pace figure opening quarter in the Breeders' Cup, and I don't think that he needs to. He's shown that he's the kind of horse that can run his top speed figures when they make him go fast early, like he did when he won the San Felipe earlier in the year, and especially like he did when he just barely lost in the Allen Jerkins. He's a horse that can start out going fast and keep going fast, so it's really no surprise that he ran a lower speed figure here. They were not looking for him to win this race by 20 lengths and run another 135. I think Todd Pletcher is perfectly content for this to just be the public workout for it, that it was, and to just get him to the next race. He's a horse who has had time off in the past, has only put forth 5 career starts so far. So there have been some issues with him, and I'm sure they just want to keep him together, keep him sound, and get him to that ultimate goal at the end of the year. So I fully expect him to run a faster speed figure next time. And we'll see if there's any pace to go with him in that race, but it's probably looking like a similar dirt mile to the one that we saw when Knicks Go won last year, where maybe Life is Good might be able to just run them off their feet.
Yeah, curious what you think about him. I actually thought it was a good sign he was able to go this slow early. He's a horse who's been pretty quirky earlier in his career, and he almost unrateable. They were taking him way off the rail at times, and this looked like a different horse in that regard to me.
Yeah, I think putting Irad Ortiz on him is an interesting choice from Pletcher because Irad, for all of the things that he does well, I don't think anybody would regard Irad as one of the elite speed riders in the country. He's typically somebody who's more known for his expert rides on the turf with horses that come from a little off the pace. So putting Irad on, it could work because he's generally a rider that's known to get horses to settle a little bit better. So he got him to settle on the lead here and was able to keep him calm from when they broke to the gate up until about the first half mile of the race, because you wouldn't have thought Life is Good to be able to run as slowly as he did on the front end. I just hope that Irad is aggressive next time in the dirt mile, because you want to let the horse run fast in a race like that when he's going to probably have to run the top speed figure of the year to beat whatever field shows up. You want to see in the final race of the year him actually run the kind of fast race that you know that he can. Moving on to the other graded stakes action from Belmont this past week. Also on Saturday, later in the day, they ran the Grade 3 Athenia on the turf, going a mile and an eighth. Another pretty uncompetitive race, Craig. We had a heavy favorite in this one, Pocket Square from the Chad Brown stable, and she did not disappoint. She got the job done here, but a race that really just turned into a quarter-mile sprint to the wire.
Yeah, this is one where we have all the figures in blue, which seems to not be all that uncommon in New York these days. The 2-5 favorite Pocket Square was able to get the job done. She was a bit of a disappointment, I'd say, when she first came to this country, but she seems to have gotten things on the right track now. I will say the most interesting thing for me was from a speed figure perspective. I don't actually see two races as diverse as I did this one in an allowance race at the same distance earlier in the card. And the two races themselves, I think it was the sixth race off the top of my head, maybe the seventh, was won by a horse named Price Talk, and it was a completely different fashion. They actually got very similar, like 120-ish speed figures, but both were races for opposite reasons where you just couldn't use the final time. The pace was way faster, way too fast in the seventh race, the one won by Price Talk, and it was way too slow in the 10th race, the Athenia Stakes. So it's just one of those where on turf sometimes when you make these speed figures, they're more like performance ratings because there's no way in the world you could use final times to rate those two races.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that earlier race. To the half mile, they went over 3 seconds faster in that Price Talk race. So I completely agree with you. You just can't compare final times in those situations because turf races, the final time is so dependent on how fast they go early. And I mean, we'll see what kind of horse Pocket Square ultimately turns out to be. I think that she might still have a tough time if Chad Brown has designs on moving her back up into Grade 1 company because she just wasn't quite good enough in races like the Just a Game and the Diana earlier in the year. And personally, I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock in this result because kind of like Life is Good, she just was not facing rivals that are of the same caliber that she is in this race. So nice to see her finish off the race better than she had previously, but I think she still is going to have to get that class test. And just quickly, Price Talk, who won that mile and an eighth race earlier in the day, which was the seventh race on Saturday, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a horse that's going to be stakes bound in the near future for Tony Dutrow, who claimed him for $50,000 at Saratoga. I was really impressed by the run that he put in, and he got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure from you, Craig. I know that he did have pace in his favor, but he put in a really impressive late run through the lane, and he's one that I would look for in some stakes over the winter.
Yeah, he actually had a 125 final time figure, and as I said, it was knocked down a little bit because of that fast pace, something that we only do on turf. But yeah, I'd agree with you for sure. And I actually retweeted something that you tweeted about Anthony Dutrow, who's actually quietly been on fire, if that's possible. But his stats are through the roof since he's kind of refound his niche and gotten some good horses in his barn.
Yeah, I know people sometimes get triggered by the Dutrow name, but I think watching races for a long time, we know that Tony Dutrow runs a completely different operation than his brother did. And he was a really good horseman, a good trainer going back 5, 10 years. I know that he had some really lean years. For whatever reason, I don't know the story going back, in the past several years, but seems like his stable is gotten back on track this year. And I mean, his runners with about 50 starters on the year in 2021 have been hitting the board at a nearly 80% clip, north of 75%, which is just amazing for a stable that's competing primarily on the Naira circuit. So, I mean, his horses are running, and I think price talk could turn out to be a really good claim for him. Moving on to Sunday's races at Belmont Park, we saw a prep for the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint in the Grade 2 Gallant Bloom. And, Gamine is considered clearly the one to beat and a likely heavy favorite in the Filly and Mare Sprint, but I think that the emergence of Bella Sophia is going to make it a much more interesting Filly and Mare Sprint than maybe people would have expected earlier in the year, because Bella Sophia is a speed horse that can keep Gamine honest on the front end. And frankly, Bella Sophia is running some speed figures that are right in line with the numbers that Gamine's been running this year.
Oh, they're actually better when you consider this one. She got a 126 for this win. I don't think Gamine has sniffed that this year, not since her Breeders' Cup win. So big effort from her again. I don't think it's a fluke at all. She just, every time out, she seems to run faster and faster, just getting better every time. She's fast early, so if you try to take it to her, you're probably going to pay the price. So clearly, in my mind, she is the leader. She would be the morning line favorite. She probably won't get bet that way, but I hope not, because as a bettor, I would be betting on her in that race. I mean, I guess you got to question the 7 furlongs a little bit, but she handled 6.5 here with no problem whatsoever. So to me, she just looks like the real deal.
No, she finished off 7 furlongs in the test like she wasn't, like she didn't have any intention of stopping, so she can get the distance. And I think it's just a matter of how aggressively they decide to ride her and what they do with Gamine in that race, because we've talked about Gamine quite a bit on this show. She's gotten away with slow pace after slow pace, and she really hasn't faced a pace rival like Bella Sophia on the front end. So can Gamine let another horse go and stalk, or will she run faster when she needs to? I think those are questions that still have to be answered this year. Obviously, Bob Baffert is more reliable, I guess you would say is the word, to show up in a race like the Breeders' Cup than maybe a trainee of Rudy Rodriguez is. But this horse has been running fast in New York, and I'll be interested to see if she can translate that performance to Del Mar later in the year.
Yeah, it's the one thing I'll say about Gamine is that she did the same exact thing last year. She kept getting slow pace after slow pace. And then when the Breeders' Cup ran, she smoked them and ran a 130. But to me personally, she hasn't looked like the same filly that we saw last year. So, if she's the favorite like she is, it's obviously we got over a month to go, so I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But I'd have to see a different filly before I'd be afraid of her, because this one looks this really good to me, Bella Sophia.
One more race to talk about from Belmont this past week was the stakes for the 2-year-old New York breds on Sunday. The Bertram F. Bongard going 7 furlongs, which was won by Shipsational. Craig, this was a race that we did as a stakes preview for DRF last week, and we both landed on this horse off the trip that he got at Saratoga in his prior race when he just got clobbered at the start. Clean break this time, and a good ride from Luis Saez to apply just enough pressure to favored Senbei the entire way, and he eventually wore that horse down.
Yeah, really good effort. Obviously, a much cleaner start. He was able to be much closer early. He was sitting just a little bit over a length off of him early, and he finally wore him down and was pulling away at the end. And for New York bred 2-year-olds, a 109 TimeformUS speed figure certainly isn't too shabby in September. So this one definitely has some talent, as does Senbei. I think 7 furlongs is probably pushing the limit of his distance capabilities, and maybe 6 furlongs is better for him. But the gap back to third tells you how dominant these two were, and probably that figure isn't a fluke, because it was full. I think the third place finisher was nearly 20 lengths back. It was basically a match race all the way around. Unfortunately, it was marred by a breakdown near the end by Happy Happy Bee, but these two put on a show.
Yeah, you never want to see what happened to Happy Happy B, and obviously condolences to his connections. And I saw just reported a few days ago that Jose Ortiz is okay. His X-rays came back negative, and he'll be back riding at Belmont, I think, on Friday. So that's good news from the human standpoint with Happy Happy B. But yeah, as for the winner Shipsational, he finished off this race very nicely. I'm not sure how far he's ultimately going to want to go, but like you said, 109, a really respectable speed figure, especially for New York breds, but even for any 2-year-old out there, that's a solid number for at this point in the year. And like I said when we handicapped this race, I still want to see Shipsational try the turf at some point because he's by Midshipman, who's a good turf sire, and he has this gigantic turf pedigree on the dam side. And if you watch him run, he's got this really nice overstriding action like a turf horse. So you want to see him get on that surface maybe at some point, but he's running so well on the dirt. I guess that they're going to stick with that for now. Let's move on to Churchill Downs, where I'm not sure they necessarily ran any Breeders' Cup preps last week, but we did see some nice performances and some noteworthy speed figures, for sure, in the Bourbon Trail, which was one of their features on Saturday at Churchill Downs, going a mile and 3/16 on the dirt. And King Fury, who is coming off, I think, a 5th place finish in the Travers, really would have had no chance in that race given how slow the pace of the Travers was, but he got back on track here against a weaker field, but he just crushed them, winning by over 13 lengths with a really nice performance.
Yeah, I will be honest. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to Churchill on Saturday. Once the Pennsylvania Derby card was done and New York, that's really all I was watching. So when I sat down to read the speed figures, this one kind of jumped off the page, and I had to look it up to see who it was. I tell people on my worksheets I never have names of even races, and I wasn't familiar with this one. So when I came up to a 124. I then opened the PPs and saw it was King Fury. And this was a legit figure. Obviously, he won by a pole, so it's not a big surprise. But as you said, he ran okay in the Travers. He basically had no chance given the pace of that race. But I thought he ran respectable, and he took a big jump here. He's a horse who's been running 116, 117 like clockwork when he was on dirt. And this time he finally took that big jump up that we often see from a 3-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, he just coasted away from this field through the lane, and he's a nice horse. His connections have announced that they are not targeting the Breeders' Cup. They're going to look more at a race like the Grade 1 Clark at the end of the year, feeling that's a more realistic goal for him, and that does seem like a wise plan of action for a horse like this. But I think it just goes to show those horses that were competing in races like the Travers and I forget the other major race that he tried earlier. I know he was a winner of the Lexington, but they're pretty good. And like you said, he had no chance with the way the race was run in the Travers. But the horses that were finishing, taking up the minor rewards in these races, they're still capable of achieving some pretty nice speed figures when they get in against company that they can defeat. And that was the case for King Fury, who I imagine is another one that's going to stick around for a 4-year-old season. And he could do pretty well next year if he continues to mature at this rate.
Yeah, being by Curlin, you would expect him to get better. That's what his speed figures show. And I think it's a smart move to bypass the Breeders' Cup. There's no reason if he was to run that kind of race in a race like the Clark that he wouldn't be ultra competitive there.
Saw a couple of speed figures of note on Friday's card at Churchill Downs. The one that caught a lot of people's attention was the 9th race and allowance optional claimer won by Sir Alfred James, who just ran a field off its feet going 6 furlongs and achieved a time of 108 flat at Churchill, which is fast. And I mean, anytime that 21-1 opening quarter gets flashed up, I mean, people get really excited. But as you know, Craig, that's not that uncommon at Churchill Downs.
No, they have a really long run up. If you've been following the game for a while at Churchill, 6 furlong races are basically 6 1/4 furlongs. That's how long it is. And currently at Churchill, you can't see a lot of the race due to construction and various mounds around the course. But Sir Alfred James was obviously going very fast. He's a horse who seems to like Churchill. He always runs well there. But this was his best yet. That 120 speed figure is pretty sharp. It's not in the league of the 3-year-olds we've talked about, but, had he been entered in some of these stakes had he run this race in some of the older horse stakes earlier in the year, he easily would have been right there at the finish.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool to see him really fulfilling the potential that he showed early in his career. He's actually a half brother to Got Stormy. I know they tried him on turf a couple times, but he just is more of a dirt sprinter, unlike his half sister. So nice to see him running some stakes quality speed figures. He was claimed out of this race, so he's no longer with Al Stahl. I think he was claimed by, I wrote it down, Norman Cash. So we'll see what the new connections can do with him moving forward. This was a nice effort and certainly the best that he's put forth so far in his career. A couple of 2-year-old maiden races that are worth mentioning from this past week at Churchill Downs were a race on Friday and one on Sunday. The Friday maiden event was going a mile on the 16th for the 2-year-old fillies, and it was won by the Ken McPeak trained Penny Saver, a horse who was making the third start of her career. She had stretched out on the turf once at Saratoga, but getting back on the dirt here clearly showed that the main track is probably her preferred surface, and she just crushed this field, putting off by nearly 10 lengths.
Yeah, this was a big effort. She got a 109 TimeformUS speed figure, and important to note it's around 2 turns. We're starting to see that more and more this time of year, and we don't often see horses improve their figure so much when they hit 2 turns for the first time. Well, 2 turns on dirt for her. But she had run a 99 last time when moved to the turf, so she looks like a pretty versatile sort. She ran second sprinting, only 5 furlongs first time out, so she's clearly got a lot of talent. And even though she won this race wire to wire, I don't think she's the kind of horse that has to have the lead.
Yeah, I can see why they tried the turf watching her run. She's got this really high need action. You'd almost think she's a daughter of Uncle Mo based on the way that she runs. She's got that big loping stride that progeny of his often have, but she's a super saver, no Uncle Mo in the pedigree. Clearly, though, she likes the dirt better, and she put forth a really nice effort here. She had actually been second to Schuylerville winner Pretty Birdie in her debut sprinting, but she's one that can clearly go longer, and you'd imagine that they try some stakes races later in the year. I don't know if it's too late for her to make a race like the Breeders' Cup. If they can squeeze in a prep race, it might be too late for that, but she's one that could target a race like the Goldenrod later in the year. The one other 2-year-old that's worth mentioning from this past week at Churchill was Sweet Danny Girl, who won her debut on Sunday at 45-1, beating the horse that took all the money for Godolphin and Brad Cox, Famed, who is the younger half-sister to Essential Quality. She went off at 4-5 and looked like she might have the race won at the top of the stretch, but Sweet Danny Girl just ran her down.
Yeah, this is a race I only watched just this morning because I was at Remington on Sunday, didn't really pay much attention to other racing around the country. And yeah, this one was pretty shocking. As you said, there was a horse who was bet pretty heavily in here, and she had no problem. I haven't done the speed figure on this one yet. This is one of the few tracks left to do, and I think my assistant's actually doing this one. But it looked to me like it's going to be a low hundreds type speed figure, maybe 103, 104 range. So certainly respectable. I have to be honest, I don't know anything about the connections and if this is a stable that breeds to race or if they're going to be looking to sell her off that performance. I always tend to think that when you see lower level, not lower level, but lesser known connections with a horse who obviously has some talent here. So it'll be interesting to see where she shows up next.
Yeah, she was a homebred for these connections, and she certainly put forth a nice effort on debut. It looked like a race that came up reasonably fast. I'll obviously wait to see the speed figure when it does show up in the chart over the next couple days. But the runner-up Famed, I mean, she had garnered some hype coming into this race, obviously as that half-sister to Essential Quality by Uncle Mo, and she ran well to be second. They were well ahead of the rest. Sweet Danny Girl just ran her down, so it'll be interesting to see where these two go in the future. Moving on to the last few venues that we're going to cover, moving on to Monmouth Park, where on Saturday last week they ran the Violet for the older fillies and mares, and it would have been nice to maybe see the Violet at Monmouth and the Athenia at Belmont combined into one race, because individually they had short fields that were on the weaker side. Chad Brown clearly dominated both of these races, and his Tama here just led from gate to wire in the Violet.
Yeah, I was going to say Chad might have a different take on that. He probably enjoyed winning. winning both of these races, particularly as easily as he did. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. Tama here ran fine. She got a 120 Timeform US speed figure, similar to what we saw from Pocket Square. If you ask me which one was better, I would be more trustworthy of Tama here because it was more of a normal pace situation. So, it's. I think it was a grade three race. If that, it might even be listed, and that's probably the kind of horse she is at this point in her career.
On Sunday at Monmouth, their feature was the Now Now Now, a prep for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, and the winner of this race, Dakota Gold, was very impressive, but Craig, this is when we have to talk a little bit about the time, because it's in the chart right now as correct, but the 21-2 opening quarter definitely raises some eyebrows, and I know that you went back and checked this, and it seems like there might have been a timing error of this race, because it did come back extremely fast, and I know that Dakota Gold got a big speed figure that's showing up currently in the TimeformUS PPs, but that might change.
Yeah, it definitely could. These races, there was another race in the ninth at the same distance, same course, same gate placement, that were impossible to rate together. I wasn't sure what to do with it, so initially I put the pace flag on there because it looked so fast that maybe this race was boosted because of the pace. But as you know, you wrote me this morning saying you thought it was something wrong with the race, and I agreed. I had it on my list to go back today as I do another race we're going to talk about a little later, and sure enough, this race definitely had a timing error. Very quick. I came up with about 1.24 seconds too fast at the final time. My guess is that probably applies to all the fractions. I do think it was probably a quick pace, and they would still be red fractions like we have in the chart now, but not the supersonic pace that we're showing.
Yeah, and the speed figures, they don't, I guess they make sense for the winner because that horse could have improved quite a bit, and he did show some real ability in his off-the-turf debut, but it just looks a little bit too high for the rest of the field as it currently stands, and I think it makes sense that the race came up about a second slower. As you said, Craig, I think that would apply to every fraction. It just seems that watching the replay of the race, virtually impossible that the entire field bunched together would have gone 21-2 for the opening quarter. That just doesn't track at all visually. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Nevertheless, Dakota Gold, the winner of this race, was pretty impressive on turf for the first time. He was supposed to be on turf in his career debut, and he handled it really well. And even the runner-up, Royal Spirit, who finished well ahead of the rest of the field, he's still a maiden. He was only third in his debut at Saratoga, but he took a nice step forward here, and once he got into the clear, was running after the winner pretty gamely. Both these horses look like they have a bit of turf ability.
They do. I'll withhold judgment until I go back and do the speed figures. It will be much easier to make when I can compare it to the other turf route just a couple races before and get a better gauge. I mean, he certainly ran fine, but he also ran fine that first time out with a 108 speed figure. So, maybe he's better on dirt. It's hard to say at this point, and the speed figures won't tell the whole story either. But I do think, fractions aside, he's still got a really nice setup in here.
The other race that we're going to discuss that had a timing issue was the Florida Stallion Stakes in Reality from Gulfstream on Saturday. They ran their two Florida Stallion Stakes going the 2-turn mile on the 16th on the dirt, one for the fillies and one for the males. The In Reality for the colts and geldings was won by Octane pretty impressively. And this is a weird one, Craig, that I'll let you talk about a little bit more, where first of all, I don't know what was going on with the tracker system at Gulfstream, but they didn't post any times for most of the races that day. So clearly they were having some kind of equipment malfunction. But I know you timed them all from video, and this race came up fast just based on the raw time compared to the other stakes race, but it almost doesn't make any sense for the horses in the field.
No, it's one where I'm definitely going to go back and do some work on this day. Tuesdays are my slowest day as far as speed figure making. I had timed this race and the Philly version, I forget the name of it, from video. And this one was a full 2.3 seconds faster than that one. I am going to go back and I guess I'd say quadruple check it just to be sure, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. But there, it's always a possibility. There was a turf race in the interim, and sometimes racetracks change. So I was definitely way more conservative given the timing issues. I only gave this race a 92. I know the buyer team gave it a much higher figure, like one that would make him competitive in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And personally, I don't see that, but I'm not too comfortable really talking about the figure because I have no faith in it right now. As you say, I don't know what the heck was going on with Trackus. I think the female version of the race they only gave a final time. This race they didn't even give a final time, not even a hand time. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Unfortunately, Gulfstream is often the thorn in my side. I mean, we get timing errors everywhere, as we've seen in Belmont. We talked about Monmouth today, but Gulfstream is consistently the worst. And just this week coming up, they're putting in their synthetic course, and I looked at it, and they're running 4 races on the synthetic course, and apparently they're not going to be able to time those either. They already have them listed as about distances, so they're not going to have times. We don't even know how far they really are, so just a mess for a guy that makes speed figures like me.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2021 and we can't time races. I don't know what's going on in this industry that makes that so difficult, but it seems to be a consistent problem from track to track. As you said, Gulfstream appears to be one of them that doesn't seem to care much at all about accuracy because they put out inaccurate times seemingly by the day with the system that they use. But it's what we're left with right now, and it's a headache for you, I know. Yeah, I don't, like you said, I don't know what the right decision is with this in reality stakes. I don't know how good these horses are. Just to be frank about it, we don't often talk about the buyers on this show, but Craig gave this number a 92 Timeform US speed figure, and the buyer guys gave it a 92 buyer, though that's the same number, but typically there's about a 20-point difference between them, with Craig's numbers typically being about 20 points higher. So I feel like the number that you gave, Craig, makes sense, just given the prior form of these horses, because a lot of them were coming in with Timeform US speed figures in the 70s and the 80s. So it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense if you gave this race a number of above 100 or even in the 110s. That would seem to be insane. But maybe they've improved a lot all at the same time. I don't know what to make of that. We'll learn more when this field runs back in the future.
Yeah, and hopefully, like I said, I'll tweet more about this race and the times of the race that I actually came up with from video. But sometimes you can't compare to race. We've talked about it many times. I've written articles about it, and this just seems like one of them to me. If I rated this one and the other race strictly by times, every single horse in this field will be jumping up 25 points or so, and it just seemed like way too much to me.
Let's close out the show with a visit to Remington Park. A virtual visit. Craig took an actual visit to Remington Park on Sunday night. So, Craig, what were your impressions of the night of racing and the Oklahoma Derby, which was won by Warren for the Brad Cox barn?
Yeah, as for the night of racing, honestly, the last few years, I think it's been a little bit disappointing as a fan because the crowd hasn't been what it used to be. I think that's because they moved to a Sunday night post. I know why they've done it. They've done it to get the spotlight to themselves on TVG, and I'm sure it helps with the handle. But as far as the atmosphere, it's not the same that it was 4 or 5 years ago. We used to have a bunch of people ship in, from Texas and Arkansas, and there was still some of that, but it's not what it used to be because, the racing's not ending until 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. Nobody wants to drive a long way after that. It's hard to get flights here. So as far as the live thing, I mean, it's something I'm always going to go to. They did the best they could, but I wish they'd run earlier in the day like they used to. But that said, we saw some decent performances. I don't think there was anything too earth-shattering. Warrant was very good. He ran his typical race. He got a 117 Timeform US speed figure. Flash of Mischief actually ran fine. I think the real disappointment here was Mr. Wireless. He was a horse who actually was pretty cold on the board. He looked like he'd probably be the favorite. I think it was the favorite on the morning line, but he went off at 3-1 and just didn't run at all. So it's a grade 3 race, and I think that's what we got, kind of a grade 3 performance.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to see the winners of the Texas Derby and the St. Louis Derby battling down to the wire. I think that's apropos for the Oklahoma Derby. We've got all these Midwest races that typically attract, the C and D level 3-year-olds. And I think that's what we saw here. Like you said, Warren's an improving horse and a respectable number for a grade 3 race, but I don't think that they're going to be competitive against the horses that we saw and have talked about that ran in races like the Pennsylvania Derby or the Travers, like the King Furies even. They'll have to take another step forward to be competitive against those kinds of horses. But an exciting race. I thought Warrant was really game after making that early move around the far turn. He sustained it pretty well through the stretch. So an exciting race to watch. We'll see if these horses can do better and run some faster speed figures in the future.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Warren is he got a great ride from Joel Rosario. The pace was on the moderate side, and Flash of Mischief with Joe Talamo, they kind of left the rail open, and Joel Rosario took it. He was able to move that horse up into the pocket and never relinquish it. And really, I think it won him the race, because had he had to wait a little bit and try to go around, I'm not sure he was going to be able to get up. Flash of Mischief was super game, and as a speed figure maker, I was just happy to see that a horse I gave a pretty nice figure winning the St. Louis Derby at Fairmount Park was able to transfer that form here. He basically ran the same number and was a big price too.
We could talk about a number of other races that got similar speed figures from this night of racing at Remington, but I do want to close out by mentioning the David M. Vance Stakes going 6 furlongs, which was won by Brilliant Ben, who is a horse that I can't say I had much awareness of prior to this race, but he's had a pretty cool year. It's rare to see a thoroughbred win 11 races in a thoroughbred season, in a single season, and he's done it in September, so he could potentially add to that total before the end of the year.
Yeah, he's become one of my favorite horses. This is the second time that he won at Remington. He won a bunch of races at Prairie Meadows, but he actually also won a few times at Oaklawn this winter against some pretty good competition. His first win, he actually had one of his wins for like a $12,000 claiming tag at Oaklawn. He was claimed that day by, I believe it was Carl Broberg. Or actually, that's where Carl Broberg ran him in a 12,001 in his first start for him. He had one minor blip in a starter allowance when he tried 2 turns, but since cutting back the sprinting, this was, I believe, his 9th win in a row, maybe, or 8 out of 9, something like that. He's just won a ton of races, and now he's starting to run fast, too. It's been kind of gradual improvement, but now he's a horse who's running in the upper teens. He ran a 117 here. He had run a 119 winning a allowance race at Prairie Meadows. So just a good, cool story for a 7-year-old gelding to just be racking up the wins. And, yeah, I'll be interested to see. He's obviously picking some nice spots for him, and I imagine you would have to go quite a ways back to find another horse that's won this many races in a single season.
Yeah, I know there was that horse running in the West Virginia area, Rapid Redux, a number of years ago. I know he won like over 16 races in a row. I don't think it was all in one season. I forget how many he did win in a season. I know that maybe he does have the record. I haven't looked it up myself, but I would imagine 11 is up there, at least in modern times. And like we said, he could add to that total before the end of the year because there are still 3 months more of racing. So it's really amazing. He's not the kind of horse that's you're going to see or be competitive in a race like the Breeders' Cup Sprint. He's not at that level, but he's a pretty nice lower level stakes horse at this point after getting claimed for just $10,000 earlier in the year by Carl Broberg. So just a really neat horse to root for that races on some lower level circuits.
Yeah, I looked it up while you were talking. Rapid Redux actually went 19 for 19, maybe it looks like, in 2011. So he definitely had 19 wins. So, and I think he finished his career with 20 consecutive wins. So he raced once in 2012 and then called it quits. So, yeah, that record is probably one that we will never see broken in this modern day of racing. But this is about as close as we're going to come, I think, what we're seeing with this horse.
Yeah, still pretty cool to do it. I don't think Rapid Redux was winning stakes races doing it, so cool to see Gurley and Ben get the job done on Sunday night, and we'll see what he has in store for the future. That's all the racing to recap this week. We will be back later in the week to record the Timeform US forecast. I don't think Craig or I have decided what we want to talk about yet. I know we've got some big Breeders' Cup preps taking place across the country. They're going to have stakes-laden cards at both Belmont and Santa Anita, so we'll probably survey both of those and see what's best to talk about. What we will choose, most likely, a pick 5 sequence to go through on the forecast later in the week. Remember that you can always listen to these podcasts on drf.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that Timeform US forecast coming up on Friday.